Hi, and welcome to Chapter 23, Learning Objective 2. And let me go ahead and share my screen with you, and we'll get right into it. Okay, there we are. Okay, so we're going to take a look at the words that define the gross domestic product, and we're going to take a look at some of the transactions that might be included in the gross domestic product. We're going to go ahead and look at that again in the next objective. So what exactly is the gross domestic product? Gross domestic product, or GDP, is the final market value of all goods and services produced within a country in a given period of time. This is usually reported quarterly, and so it really gives us a barometer, if you will, about how the economy is doing. So when we talk about things like economic growth, what we're talking about is gross domestic product. If you totaled up everything that people buy, everything that the government buys, everything that people use for businesses, and all of those things together, as well as our net exports, you're going to take a look, and that's going to be the gross domestic product. Okay. So the first thing we want to make sure that we clearly define is the idea of market value. So what is the market value? And market value is difficult because market values change. So let's say in 2019, we're looking at egg production, okay? And let's say you buy, and we're just going to make it really simple, one household, 1 dozen eggs. So 1 dozen eggs are equal to 12 eggs, right? And let's say you're going to pay $2.40 for them, or approximately 20 cents per egg, okay? And then you go and you buy a dozen eggs in 2020. Again, you're going to buy 1 dozen, so that gives you 12 eggs, but now you're paying $3.60 for those eggs. So approximately 30 cents an egg. And what I want to do is to look at specifically this idea of the output, okay? Now, as we see here, a dozen eggs is 12 in 2019, and it's 12 in 2020. That hasn't changed. What's essentially changed is the price. And it kind of makes it look like that the output is greater. So it is kind of misleading. I guess that's a good way to put it, because market values change. And so what this really means is that there's a difference, and it's quite a big difference, between what we look at in terms of real output, that's what we would call the count, if you will, and the part that is valued in dollars, which we would call nominal. And we're going to learn a lot more about that in the upcoming objectives that we talk about. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and erase all the ink here. And again, we do measure, so the US dollar, if we're making net exports and we're taking a look at exports and imports, we do measure them in the same. There's also things that contribute to GDP that don't necessarily have a market value. So there are some things which are left out of GDP, like illegal goods, unpaid household work, right? Think about it this way. If you hire somebody to do all the things you didn't want to do, so maybe a driver, a groundskeeper, and also, let's see, I would like a maid. Let's see, a lot of other things I would love to hire people to do. But because I'm doing all of those things myself, in a way, I'm taking away or subtracting that would be work from GDP. Okay, so that's what we mean by things that don't have a market value. We also mean final value of all goods and services. A typical marketing chain looks like this. We start with the producer of the product. we look at, then the product moves to the wholesaler, then to the retailer, and then finally to the consumer. In GDP, what essentially we're measuring is only the product down here, from the retailer to the end user, consumer. It could also be retailer to government. So I want to kind of put government here, or if it's a business, it could be that too. And again, the business is selling the good to the end user. So it might be inventories and those kinds of things would be included. I think that'll become clearer as we move on. But we're only going to include the products that are in the final phase of the retail chain. So here's an example. Let's say that the producer makes a product for 30 cents. They sell it to the wholesaler, and the wholesaler marks it up 10 cents. The retailer marks it up 50 cents. And so we're not going to include 90 cents. We're not going to add all those up because that would be miscounting. It would be double counting. Essentially, what we're going to do is to just include the 50 cents here. That is what we would include in the final market value. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. So intermediate goods are not included. We do have something that we look at, which is a little bit different, and that's the producer's price index. Is a way to measure the inflation here. Another one is we would look at manufactured goods and so on. So there are some categories that we can use for those. We're talking here about goods and services. Difference is goods are tangible, right? So we consume goods, okay? And we experience services. Okay, so that's what we mean by tangible. And many times you'll hear in accounting consumables, right? And those are things that you're going to have to replenish, like toilet paper and things like that. They are not things that that we would experience. Okay, produced. We mean things that are produced within the United States. So it doesn't matter where the business is from. If that good is produced within that country, it becomes part of that country's GDP. So let me give you an example. An example might be Sony. So over here, I have the US and then I have Japan by their little symbol here for yen. Okay, so this will be Japan. And if I look at this, Sony is a company that is headquartered in Japan. But Sony has retailers, also has manufacturers here in the US. So anything that is produced within this border of the US is going to be part of US GDP. Now, another example might be Kentucky Fried Chicken, right? And Kentucky Fried Chicken is based here in the US. But if they sell the chicken, all right, in Japan, that becomes part of Japanese GDP. Okay, so produced within a country, I kind of did both of those. And what we also mean by this, and let me go with produced, is they have to be produced within the time period. So we often talk about quarters, okay? So I'm gonna use 2019. We have quarter one, which is January through March. We have quarter two, which is April, May, June. We have quarter three, which is, what was I thinking right there? I have no idea. Okay. okay, which is July through September. And then we have the fourth quarter, which is October through December. Okay, so this is where it gets a little interesting. Let's imagine that we have a car. GM produces a car in January, okay? So one car. They sell that car in the second quarter. Which quarter would we include it in GDP? Because we're saying produced, we're going to include that in the first quarter. It's not sold until the second quarter. So essentially what happens is this one car then becomes inventory, and it carries over to the second quarter where it's actually sold. A lot of people think it has to be sold. No, it has to be produced, not necessarily sold. So it would be included in 2019's quarter one production. Again, within a country, anything that's produced within the borders becomes part of that country's GDP. And in a given period of time. Again, I used quarters previously because that's exactly how we report GDP when we're looking at it. Okay, we're going to look a little bit more at GDP in the next objective. And so right now, you should have a pretty good handle on what we mean by gross domestic product, the final market value of all goods and services produced in a country in a given year. I'll see you next time. Thanks.